Welcome to the next session at the Purpose-Driven Business Summit. You're in for a treat because we're going to have an interactive experience about regenerative innovation, which I think is going to be fascinating. It's very cutting edge, and I'm looking forward to learning what it's all about. So I will let Asrian and Mansi introduce themselves in a second, but I just want to give you my usual little logistics announcements. So all of the recordings are in the YouTube channel, and you have to use the link that I've been sending out to get to them. If you just go search for it, they're unlisted, so you can't actually find them. You have to go in with the link. And also just want to remind people that we have the Facebook group, and that's a place for, since we can't meet by the coffee machine or out having snacks, that's a way to be able to have some additional interaction than what we're going to be able to have today on this session. So if you haven't logged into the Facebook group, I encourage you to do that. It's a great place to share what you're up to, ask questions, share insights, all of that. So for this session, just a couple of things. I'm going to be turning off my video and turning it over to our wonderful facilitators. And they're going to present some things, and then at a certain point, they're going to want to also have you have the ability to share what you're thinking about what they're going to ask you about. So I'm going to be behind the scenes making you all into panelists so we can see you and hear you. So when you see the request to become a panelist come across, don't panic. We're a friendly group. It's just so that you can share your thoughts and you're not kind of locked behind the scenes. So I wanted you to know that that's kind of what's going on. And so please just relax into it, play full out, be active, and enjoy this session. It's something different than any of the other sessions that we have at the summit. So I think it's going to be great. So I am going to turn it over now to our facilitators.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to go a little off script real quick. I'm wondering if it would be okay if you went ahead and made Edwin and Tamara and Terry panelists so that we could see them on. I would just love to be able to see everybody if possible. Is that okay?
Hey, it's a good thought.
And I guess they have their cameras off, so that's okay. But
Great.
Cool.
Do you want to share screen?
Yeah. I'm going to share the screen here.
Nice to see you, Terry.
All right.
Okay, I'll kick us off. So first, I just want to say that we are so excited you chose to come to this session. This is going to be a conversation. We have been having this conversation, me and Adrian, for a while, and we're excited to just bring more people into this conversation. So if you have thoughts, if you have contradictions, if you disagree with something that we're saying, we want to hear that. This is not about us trying to sell something or sell an idea. This is really about being in dialogue about this cutting edge idea of regenerative innovation. Having said that, I'll quickly tell you a little bit about me. My name is Mansi Kakkar. It's pronounced Mansi. And I like to use a metaphor to speak about who I am. And this metaphor is of a plant called fireweed. Now, if you've ever been around or lived close to an area which has forest fires or wildfires, you might be familiar with this plant where once a wildfire completely burns down a forest, and if you go back sometimes 7 days, sometimes 14 days later, you'll see this burnt forest covered, the floor of the forest completely covered with this bright purple flower. And this wildflower, its main role in this ecosystem is to create the conditions for this forest to now regenerate itself and become a full, healthy forest again. And I like to use that metaphor to talk about who I am. I'm human fireweed. And my role that I see on this planet for the rest of my life from now on is about regenerating a lot of the forests that are burning, literal as well as human, and of our human world. A bit about my background. I've been in this field of design for 14 years. I've been in innovation for the last 8. And for the last 5, I've been tinkering with this idea of regenerative innovation. So I'm super excited to be here and share what we have. And all my fire weeding takes many shapes. You can read about it on LinkedIn if you are on the slide. With that, Adrian.
Thanks, Mansi. So I've been an entrepreneur and investor and social impact person for, I'd say, the last 10 to 12 years. I started my first company when I was 25, and it was an organic food company called Yum Butter, where we tried to build this company around this idea of holistic responsibility. And so back when, as sustainability was continuing to become a big buzzword, we said, what is the chance to go past sustainability? And now 10 years later, after growing that company from a tiny little farmer's market stand to being sold in 6,000 grocery stores across the company and stepping away, what I'm really passionate about is taking this idea of holistic responsibility and turning it into a new way to look at the world that Mansi and I call regenerative innovation, so that our businesses, our organizations can really start to think about not just transactional, but how can they actually give more than they take from the world. And so we're just really excited to share that with you today.
All right. So if we go to the next slide, where I like to start is here, like really go way up. So this is actually a picture taken on July 5th of this year, so recent. And I love looking at pictures like this, and it really kind of brings me to the reality of where we are around that little blue dot, which you don't really see the whole dot, but it's a beautiful blue dot. And if you can see, there's this thin blue sort of a blanket, really small line that you can see around this earth, and that's our atmosphere. And that is literally the thing that makes all your and my stories, our everyday moments of joy, our everyday moments of grief, possible. That little blue line. And I just like to start there to ground us in the reality of how much of what we are and who we are and what we do is dependent on something that fragile. It looks so fragile. So if we go to the next screen here, to the next slide, this is a graphic which I almost hold in my head. It's from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and what they did is they looked at a lot of the things that are happening on our planet, our planetary ecosystems, and they found a way to, using quantities and data, map that. And so they came up with these 9 main boundaries, planetary boundaries. And if you see in this graph, out of the 9, in 4, we have already exceeded what is called the zone of uncertainty. And in 2, we're in beyond the zone of uncertainty, high risk. So that's like the big picture. Now I'm going to bring us back to the current moment. We are all in an active pandemic. We're all experiencing a lot of social unrest in different ways for very valid reasons. And nobody here would disagree that we are in a very uncertain time. And uncertainty is not just something that we can figure out with this once this pandemic solves itself, but it's going to be a continuous thing looking at this bigger picture. So having said that, what I see as a huge ray of hope, and not just a ray of hope, but an audacious desire, which both Adrian and I share, is, okay, this is the situation, what are we going to do about it? So if we go to the next slide, this is where we bring this idea of regenerative innovation, which really, in this completely uncertain time, seeks to design, using this uncertainty, in a way that we can have human, ecological, and economic equity. We don't want to sacrifice any of those 3: people, planet, and pockets. We want to figure out how to work for all 3 of them. And that's what regenerative innovation is about. And that's what we're going to be talking about, but within the context of business. So if you go to the next slide, in the US, 99.9% of all businesses are small businesses, that they have less than 500 employees. And to me, that's the engine of our economy. And what I'm passionate about is how can we make this engine be so regenerative that we can actually show that 0.1%, which have they have all the billboards and everything, but show them what it actually looks like to operate in a holistic way, and still have economic equity. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Adrian.
So really quickly before we dive in, this is our journey for today. So we're going to start and introduce some principles that we've been distilling over the last 10 to 15 years through our practice. And then we're going to talk about actual tactics. So like how can you as an organization or an entrepreneur implement this model? And then we would love to get into practice. So putting pen to paper, real time, so that we can all work together to do some fun stuff and just getting started into the practice of regenerative innovation. So that's our journey for today. But first, I want to start with a quick story. And this story starts in 1991 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where Vera Cordeira, a physician, noticed a problem. Young kids were coming into her clinic and they were sick. She would treat them and they would go home. And they would come back. And it's just this vicious cycle of these kids who were living in slums, coming back in and being rehospitalized over and over. And she had a moment of pause and said, okay, if I keep doing this, the problem's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So let me think about how to do this differently. What Vera did was she started to think about the network and the nodes of these children. And she mapped that out and said, where do they live? What is their family life like? What's their education like? What is actually the root cause of this rehospitalization? And so what she ended up creating was a program that is now called Brazil Child Health, the organization, or in Portuguese, Associação de Saúde Criança. And apologies if anybody speaks Portuguese out there. I'm sorry that probably wasn't as beautiful as it should be. But what now, all these years later, Brazil Child Health is a beautiful model where they actually work with the child's family, and they create a family action plan, a 2-year blueprint that addresses not just the sickness, but the housing that they live in. So what she found out is that if the house is substandard, that's one of the main reasons for causing infections. And so they address housing with the family, they address income generation, and the parents actually get vocational training. If there's a need for citizenship, they help them work through the process of gaining citizenship. And then they ensure that the kid remains in school through a few different mechanisms. So there's a 5-point approach through health, housing, income generation, citizenship, and education that Brazil Child Health now uses as its own organization outside of the public hospital system. And so now if we look at, okay, this is great. We all want to do all these amazing things, but what are the results? So Georgetown University in 2013 looked at results from families 3 to 5 years after they created a family action plan with Brazil Child Health. And there was a 92% increase in family income. There's a 90% increase in home ownership. The families that rated themselves as being good or very good went from 9.6% to 51%. There was an 86% decrease in the average number of days that children spent in the hospital, which means that the public health system is saving a lot of money. So those are amazing results. And it came from a moment of saying, wait, how might we do this differently? How might we address that root cause of this problem? And the beautiful thing about Brazil Child Health is they didn't stop there. They became a capacity builder, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And so now they actually do research and development to continue improving their own methodology. You know, imagine that, a company saying, oh, we made something and it's not very good. We're going to improve it. So they're continuing to do that. They consult and educate with other organizations. They convene meetings across the world with entrepreneurs, foundations, governments to basically disseminate their methodology. And they have 11 franchises across Brazil. So they've actually distributed their impact, which is one of the principles that we talk about. So this story is so beautiful because if Eric Cordera had said, let's build more hospitals, let's give more medicine, we would have exacerbated this problem and continue to perpetuate a degenerative cycle. So I think we have to ask ourselves, with all the wicked, gnarly problems that exist in our world today, how are we going to approach those? Are we going to continue building on the same old systems and same old processes, or are we going to do something different?
I always love hearing that example because it's so inspiring to me. Okay, so we've been talking about this word regeneration, regenerative. So let's first like ground ourselves in what do we actually mean by that. One of my teachers, Bill Reid, who I've been blessed in my life with a lot of great teachers. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, just as Adrian is as well. And Bill Reid wrote this article called Shifting from Sustainability to Regeneration way back in 2007. And this graphic that you see on your screen is his big call to businesses. And the idea here is, so if you look at this graph, we're going to start at the bottom and then move up. The bottommost part, you see that it says conventional practice. And this is where, as a business, we are operating in a way that we are within law. We are within the laws that or policies that operate or are created for businesses to operate within. Now, if we go a little bit higher, I'm going to skip green and go to sustainable. Sustainability, as Adrian was also mentioning, is a buzzword. It's really gaining a lot of traction. But what Bill was creating a provocation around was that sustainability is basically 100% less bad. We're basically saying we're covering our tracks. And that was a very provocative thought. And then he further went ahead and said, what we want to go towards is regenerative. And what that means is where the way we operate, it has a level of integration between what we're doing and the humans and the planet. And it's regenerative. There's this co-evolution of whole systems. And so a quick way to ground that in an example would be if sustainable is zero carbon, regenerative would be carbon positive, where you're really trying to figure out a way to make something better and leave it better rather than just not having a negative impact. So if we go to the next slide here, this is what I want us to ground in thought of, like, okay, that's what regenerativity, it's moving that way. But when we see this graph, it makes us feel as if, oh, this is harder. Sustainability is hard enough, and now we have to go to regenerative. That seems like a stretch. I don't want to sign up for this. And what I want to actually say is that we're not, I wish we could redo this graph. Actually, we will redo this graph now that I say it. But the core idea is it's actually easier. Moving towards regenerativity is actually easier. It's not harder. I know that's a big claim. And I'm going to go to the next slide to tell you why I think that is. And that is this. We tend to focus on our products and our processes. And that's where we try to bring sustainability in. And the field of sustainability has really grown a lot. There are a lot of best practices out there. There's the whole benefit cooperation movement, which has really made headways in how to do that. And what we are saying is that that's great, but we also need to focus on this whole other thing, which is relationships, which is people, which is conversations, networks. These things are almost as important as the products and processes we create as a business owner. And so regenerative innovation is really trying to focus on those edges, those sort of areas which can be easily overlooked in our day-to-day going about our life and our work. So if we go to the next slide here, what really we're trying to say is not that you have to go beyond sustainability to regenerativity. No, what we're saying is we want to include regeneration to our existing sustainability practices. And regenerativity is grounded in this idea of focusing on relationships and networks and conversations. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it to Adrian.
So one example I'll give us there is that if we think about what we're calling degeneration, that's something that has worked for a period of time, but Where I live in Colorado, and specifically in rural Colorado in a small town, what we've seen over a long period of time is these communities built on regenerative models where they are extracting things from the earth, trees, mineral ore, things like that, putting it on trains and shipping it away out of their communities to be marked up by somebody else down the line and sold to somebody else somewhere else. And so the actual ramifications of that now is you have these towns that were once robust and healthy, and they've shriveled, and people have had to leave and go elsewhere to look for work. And so just as a provocation for those communities, what if you had built a regenerative community that kept the capital and the intellectual capital and the social capital and the cultural capital inside of that community? And in farming and gardening, there's a burgeoning field called permaculture, which stands for permanent agriculture, but it's in essence a way of including plants in systems that benefit each other. So you're putting in plants that impact the soil in different ways, and you're putting in plants that are some are low growing and some are mid growing and some are high growing to shade out the sun, and some have leaves that fall off to nourish the ground and create compost and nutrition, and you got worms and microbes in the ground that are breaking those things down, and you have this holistic system that is actually creating a stronger, more resilient system versus a flat farmed field that when a drought comes, it doesn't hold moisture. It doesn't have the nutrition in the soil, whereas a permaculture guild does. And so what would a community that looks more like a permaculture guild look like? One that cycles its nutrition. The other example that we talk about as a really simple example is for so long we've built our cultures and our economies on this idea of ourselves being a tree that wants to grow as tall as possible. I want to grow my tree and I want to be the best. What we haven't realized, and what we're starting to realize, is that a tree's health is based on the health of the forest around it. So imagine I'm growing my tree. It doesn't matter. Someday the weak soil around me, I'm just going to topple over. And so what would it look like to actually build the soil health and actually give into the forest around me so that I can be as strong as possible and we can be as strong as possible? So that's kind of the essence of what we're trying to do with regenerative innovation. But before we get into the how, this is a really important point for us, is that this is a map of how consciousness forms our worldview. And it's a really simple map. I'm not a neuroscientist and I don't play one on TV. But if we look at this on the left-hand side of our map, we basically have this black box of consciousness that sits inside of our bodily sensation. We don't know necessarily what happens in consciousness, but we know that some stimulus hits this box and out of it comes a perception. From that perception, there's a thought or emotion that might arise, and then there's an action that might happen or not happen, and there's a belief that might form or not form. And eventually that forms our worldview, or how we actually perceive our reality. So an example of that is 100 years ago, when they poked a hole in the ground and black liquid started bubbling up. They said, let's burn this. That's great. And so that moment of awareness turned into perception to thought, action, belief, worldview. And today that worldview still exists, that we can just burn as much of this black oil as possible. And yet we now realize that times are different, things need to change, but what we need to do is find this moment of awareness that's between sensation and perception as just a moment of pause, or perhaps as a pattern interrupt. And so there's some real pattern interrupts that are happening right now with protests and with the pandemic and the ocean acidifying. The list can go on. But for us, we also want to ground this in ourselves, because if we don't change our own ability to perceive the world differently, how could we ever change our worldview? And so how we do that is by increasing our awareness, increasing this moment of pause and this pattern interrupt, so that we can start to create what we want to be in the world. And we'd love to offer an exercise to do this right now. It's just going to be a short 2-minute awareness practice, but it's not going to be a meditation. I'm actually going to say some words, and my invitation to you is if you'd like to close your eyes, feel free. And as I'm saying words, I only want you to be aware of what happens in your body. If you can sense anything changing or not changing, and we'll use that as a short awareness practice. Sound okay? So if you'd like, go ahead and close your eyes. And we'll do this for just 1 minute, and I'm going to say a few words. I'm saying these words non-judgmentally, by the way, and they are not planned. And then I'll bring us out at the end. Bread. Donald Trump. Computer screen. Apple pie. Cheesecake. Healthcare. Yellow. $1 million. Love. Newborn baby. Okay, we'll bring you out of that. Thanks for joining in. So those were just pieces of sound. Those are audible things said without judgment, hitting your consciousness. And I would love to know, some other time we'll talk about if anything arose in your body with these different words that hit your consciousness. But I think for me, that's an invitation that between that stimulus and our perception, we just have a moment of awareness that we can choose. We can choose how we see that and how we see the world. And ultimately, that's going to change our worldview. And if our current reality was built upon people 100 years ago and 500 years ago, then our future reality, 10, 50, and 100 years from now, is built on us in this moment, actually choosing what we want that reality to be. So with that said, let's keep moving.
Right. So we've talked about this idea of how perception needs to shift and how important that window of awareness is. And what I'm going to do now is, we got you on the business front. We're going to share some language to assist, to almost as windows to what is and what can be. And just notice how you feel when I talk about these mindset shifts for a regenerative future around business, and see what happens. Because this is, again, we are trying to create those windows, but this is thought out from a depth of what are these 9 things, 9 mindset shifts that we can bring. And we're very, very excited to be offering this to you. So the way I'm going to speak about this is I'm going to go through questions, and those questions if you go to the next slide, what, for whom, how much, with whom, and to what end. So those are the questions we're going to try and answer in the next few minutes. All right, so going to the next slide, the first one. Businesses, and I've touched upon the first one, businesses focus on a product and a service, and that is the center of all their thinking, their visioning, their doing. What if we moved towards a purpose-centric business, where there is a product and a service or an offering, but that is an instrument for this purpose? What happens if you do that? Another one is profit. Now, I want you to know that I love money because it helps me get things. I'm not saying money is bad. I'm saying that the idea of profit as the only motivating factor of what we are doing, what if we shift that to something like regenerative value? Regenerative value is the idea of what I've already spoken about. How can we audaciously create value for our pockets, people, and the planet? How can we really get that no compromise, all three, we want to do it, and we figured out how to do it. Okay, so that's what. So now going to for whom. You must have heard this phrase, customer is king. I have a background in branding. I work for a branding consultancy, so I know I've taught a lot of my clients that this is important. But what if we moved from that idea to people are queen, where customers are one stakeholder of humans that a business interacts with? And what if we also start thinking about employees like we think about customers? If we start thinking about our supply chain, all the people that we depend on to deliver this purpose-centric regenerative value, if we see all of them as equally important. And I hope you can appreciate the change of the metaphor play there. The next is how. Okay, so we now know what we're going to do, we know for whom, but how are we going to do it? There is this approach where we create a business model, and then we strive and put all our resources towards maintaining that business model. That is a core way business operates, and it makes sense. You know, you've created something, it's valuable, and you want to ensure that it keeps reaching the people you want it to reach. But what if we moved from that idea to an evolving business model? And let's just bring us to the current now. How many of us made plans for this pandemic that we had to change? Like we were like, oh, I'm going to go here. And then the pandemic happened and we had to move things around. How many businesses now are having to shift their core offering because of this uncertainty? This is something that we have to really ground the reality in, which is uncertainty is not going away. And so if it's not going away, then we need to figure out how to evolve our business models as we are navigating uncertainty. The next point is around silos. Now, we kind of like speaking to the Vera example that Adrian spoke about earlier, where healthcare was the silo in which she was operating as a physician. And what she did was completely blow up that view to include all the systems, and then education became part of the 5-point plan. Income became part of the 5-point plan. So that is that systemic lens. What is the reality of this person? And really going into that lens. And to use the metaphor that Adrian shared, what is the forest around me, which I need to be strong as a business. And finally, control to distribute it. And this is a little subtler. And it's grounded in our false drive for control as humans. We like to control our environment. That's how we deal with uncertainty. And we do that in business as well. Again, not judgmental. We're human. This is what we do. But how about instead of being driven from that, we distribute the pain and the ferocity and the effort needed to run a business? What if it wasn't that painful? What if it was easier because we figured out a way to distribute the effort across multiple people and not just me? I kind of really like that, because as an entrepreneur, I've slogged a lot, worked 100 hours a week, and I'd like it to be easier. Okay, next, how much? So instead of infinite scale, which is this drive towards whatever I want to figure out how to reach it everywhere. How about we look at intentional scale? And intentional scale sort of touches upon the combination of regenerative value and evolving business models. At what level can your regenerative value reach people? That's your intentional scale, when it can continue to evolve as well. Finally, with whom? Here we're really thinking about this idea of competition and how trees, imagine 2 trees in a forest competing with each other. It doesn't happen because they kind of work together. But in our human systems, we do that, and that's normal, that's natural. Competition is a natural human drive. But what if we extended that to be competition that's grounded in coalition and collaboration, where we compete to deliver more regenerative value rather than with each other for something else? And finally, to what end? Here we're talking about, could you go to the next slide, Adrian? Thank you. Instead of market dominance, which is another core driver for businesses to what end to go to. What if we start thinking about market capacity building? And I'll again point to the example we've already shared, where the model that was built in Brazil is now being shared with a lot of other systems, a lot of other entities, a lot of other countries. And that is, I think, a true example of a shift towards a regenerative future. With that, I think we've spoken enough. We should now hear a little bit from all of you. So if we could go to the next slide, we have some questions there, which we would love to just hear from all of you, whoever's willing to be brave and engage in this dialogue with us. We've said a lot. What's come up for you? What really stuck with you? Is anything shifting in the way you're thinking about your work, about your business? Is there something that you're really curious about that we can spend some time digging into, or what questions do you have? And we're just going to open the floor up and hear from whoever is here.
And you may need to unmute yourself. I just unmuted myself. Well, the one thing I noticed to kind of kick it off while other people are getting their thoughts together is when you showed the diagram with the kind of interrupter in there, like the point that sometimes we just continue to replicate systems that were designed for a different time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And how that actually holds us back. And we're not even necessarily aware that we're doing that, but we're using business models, for example, maybe that were developed at a different time and don't take into account some of the things that you both were just mentioning. So that definitely stuck with me, and there's more thinking to be doing about that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sue.
And it's also natural because it's kind of like we only use the blueprints that we've seen, and so it's normal. And I just want to hold it in our humanity and compassion for ourselves that, yeah, of course we do that. And that's why this field is so powerful, because we get to pave what the next can look like. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Go on. We got some people on here. Anybody brave enough to unmute you, or do I have to unmute you? Oh, somebody's putting a note in chat, so let's check that out.
Anna says, I'm curious about impact measurement. Yeah. So I feel like you could talk more about that than I could.
To say about that?
I think that what I would say is that there is a whole field of developmental evaluation, which I find very promising, which can be the merging of regenerative innovation and impact assessment, where the idea of this model is to really create the mindset of designer in an evaluator, which I think is pretty awesome. And the idea is that if I'm measuring things, how can I think not just from an assessment point of view, but also think from as a designer, if I was designing this thing. And if the impact evaluator or assessor and me as the entrepreneur have a shared vocabulary around what are we trying to do, we're trying to strengthen the forest, not just make me the strongest tree. Then there is a lot of opportunity to rethink the tools we use. There's a lot of opportunity to rethink what we measure. And rather than just measuring reach, how do we measure regenerative value for the system? That would be a powerful thing to tinker on. And if anybody here wants to do that with us, we would love to do that. But again, there's a lot of possibility in shifting the way we think about impact assessment as well. And even what is true impact, right? I could even go down to that level.
Yeah.
And from a regenerative innovation, true impact is when people, planet, and pockets, all three are happy. So we have to figure out how to measure that.
One of the things that comes up as I'm listening to you talk about that, because of course, impact measurement is a big thing that I've spent 20 plus years working with all different kinds of organizations about. It's like, I think sometimes there's what's the long-term impact, and people are worried they can't measure that. so they don't measure any more immediate things that show they're on the right path. Because there's precursors. Like you don't get to world peace if you don't know how to talk yourself out of a dialogue where there's conflict. So there's like different steps, but I think people go, oh, nope, can't measure anything. And, you know, I always think that's too bad, because it is only through, as you were saying, doing some measurements, can you figure out if you're moving the needle? And if it's not happening the way you want it to, what can you tweak to make it more effective? And so that's really important feedback. It's not just, oh, we didn't, what we wanted didn't happen. It's like, well, what didn't happen and why didn't it, and what can we do differently?
Right.
So
And I think about, just to add on a little bit, in the Brazil child health example, if the impact measurement at that point in time was, you know, is this kid getting better, or how many kids am I seeing? Like even that kind of efficiency impact measurement, which a lot of organizations are built around, like how many people can we help? Well, if that's your measurement, then you are incentivized for that cycle to keep happening, right? I'm incentivized for that child to keep coming back into my clinic if that's my measurement. And so I think there's an opportunity here to say, what are we really trying to measure? And when we zoom out and you say, okay, if the parent's income goes up and they're able to improve their home a little bit, or they're able to move out of the favela, that's something we weren't measuring before, but now we can measure that now, because it's come out of this new exploration of the system that we're looking at.
I love this question. I have a couple more thoughts. And make me stop, Adrian, if I'm taking us off track. One is the example of Tom's Shoes. If you're familiar with this social enterprise, now it's a great idea. And I'm going to try and say this as non-judgmentally as I can. But one of the unintended impacts of this model was that the local shoe producers lost market, because now there were people getting free shoes. And so there's something about what are the unintended consequences, which is an important conversation to have when we're talking about impact assessment. The other thing is this idea, which I would love to, I guess I will write about sometime, is participatory assessment, where I am assessing what is happening with the person I think I'm impacting. So it has that two-sided context coming together to create a big picture. So anyway, those are a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share. Oh, Anna says something more. In fact, I love the storytelling as a way to be conscious about the impact. Do you have any recommendation about that? Anybody have thoughts on that? Storytelling as a way to be curious, conscious about impact.
I'd be curious to know more, Anna. What do you mean by be conscious about impact?
I'm here. It's just that I'm a Spanish speaker. It was
welcome.
So nice to
okay.
hear you.
Yes, my English is not the best. Because of that, I was using the chat. But because you are asking me the details, I don't know. I just thinking about the when I mentioning consciousness, I'm talking about the different levels of consciousness. I'm talking about Ken Wilber or something like that. Okay.
Oh, love it, love it.
Yeah. I love this kind of approaches.
Yeah.
And maybe because of that, I love the storytelling. It was
beautiful.
I don't know how to say that. Okay, sorry, it's just that.
No, please.
I'm a Spanish speaker. I'm
with you 100%. I'm hearing you.
Sorry. Yes. I really love the approach that you are sharing with us. I really appreciate the have um, um, options to be talking with others and working with others to find the best way to do an assessment. And I love the fact that you mentioned Mansi because of that. Yes, because for me, it's not about just quantitative measurements. I love the qualitative options, but you know, you need to obtain the best way to show them to others.
Absolutely.
You are talking with somebody loving these kind of approaches, but looking for the best ways to show them, you know.
Cool, thank you.
One example that comes up, which you might find interesting, is from Nora Bateson, the WAM Data Lab. Now, this whole methodology that she's created is around trans-contextual data. So how do we look at data within its context? So it's kind of like big data meets storytelling. And it's really interesting because what you're bringing up, that qualitative data and like we need both. Like there's no vilification of either. It's really, yes, both. How do we figure that sort of combined approach? And they're doing some really interesting work around trans-contextual data. And I would recommend you to nerd on that. Maybe you have set you on a rabbit hole there.
And what was that name, Mansi? I'll type it in the...
Nora Bateson, WAM Data Lab.
May you write it? Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
WARM, like WARM
Oh.
Data Lab.
Cool.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for that question. I love that discussion.
I'd be curious for anybody else if there's just anything shifting for anybody, or any like other red flags that come up. You're like that's not possible, or this something about this doesn't sound like it's going to work, or what else is coming up for people?
The Edwin typed a question in.
Great. How often does one have to check in with the process of being conscious in our business?
Moment to moment?
No, I'll wage you know, this is where I just am inspired by this beautiful planet. Like the planet has a system of seasons, and the seasons sort of evaluate in some way what's going to come up next, how are we going to be in this new season. And so there's something about thinking seasonally as a business which is really interesting to me. And how can we, because the truth is we cannot be an evolving business that's evolving every week. You know, that's not a possibility. And so what is a time frame? And we don't know the answer to this. And if somebody has insight, please tell us, what is that sweet spot of the right amount of time where you've done enough experimentation, you've got enough data from the ground that you can actually now make some decisions that can actually evolve rather than just reacting. So we're not saying reacting business models, we're saying evolving. And that evolution, evolving it's slow and it's intentional, but it is happening moment to moment. And it's really about being aware and being tuned in, but then having a seasonal actual changing, evolving the business model per se. That would be my thoughts. Adrian, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, the one thing that I think about is also using this as a way to anchor why we do what we do, and really make sure that we're embedding as much as possible in the foundation, and then continuing to explore and add as we learn more. And you see this in more traditional approaches like the lean startup, where you're sprinting for 4 or 5 days to design something or prototype something, then you're putting it into the world for a couple weeks and getting feedback, and you're assessing that feedback. And so I think there's a way to do that consciously as well, and start to think about, you know, the impact that I'm making, but we're really just embedding all of that in through the design process at the beginning, so that we're measuring the right things, or we're measuring better than we were before. And maybe we weren't measuring the right thing, and we learned that through these testing and iterating processes. And similar to how Mansi was saying with seasons, that sprint might be 4 or 5 days, and then a build might be 6 months, or vice versa. So we might, it's the appropriate response at the appropriate time, I think. But having an anchor and a North Star to guide us is really important.
Sue, do you have something to say?
So I'm going back to your Tom's Shoes example, that, sometimes doing good, and we're talking about purpose-driven business. Sometimes best intentions, there's unintended things that happen that are actually negative for local economies or whatever. So what kind of guidance do you have for people that are trying to think about how to do something new and innovative? Like, how do you check in to make sure, okay, are we really, the metrics kind of comes into it, but what guidance do you have? How do you make sure you're not really screwing things up while you're trying to do good?
It's a great question.
I love that. Adrian, do you want to? I have thoughts, but I'll let you go first if you want.
As one of my teachers would say, the question is too good to answer. It's such a good question that why should we try to answer it? No, I'm kidding. Part of me actually wants to keep going because the answer that comes to me is systems mapping, and the systems lens that we talk about really allows us to explode our perspective and start to think about the relationships that we exist within, which precede the outcomes in some way. So if we're back to Tom's shoes, I'm giving this shoe to this pair of shoes to this kid without shoes. They're not getting the worms that would typically enter their bodies through their feet, the parasites, which I think that model was kind of built off of, let's get something on their feet so they don't get parasites. And then we're going and assessing that and saying, okay, 100 out of 100 kids had parasites a year ago. How many have that now? 50, 25, who knows? Maybe the kids aren't wearing the shoes, or maybe the shoes are breaking down. And so there's like a whole thing to assess there. But what if we start at the beginning again, and we say, and I don't know the answers to these questions, but why are these kids barefoot in the first place? Or map the system out from those kids. Maybe it could be simply paving a path instead of having them walk through dirt, or maybe the floor of their school is dirt and they take off their shoes when they go into school anyway. All these things that I don't have the answers to, but there's a way to start looking out and saying, oh, maybe here's another area that we could start to impact, or maybe here's another node in that network that we could also impact. And so, we're trying to precede, I think, the outcomes, and then figure out, okay, what are we measuring, and why are we measuring those things?
I have a couple of thoughts on that, if I can share. And sorry, Adrian, if I'm making us go off track here. But I love that question, because to me, what comes up is like, we will never get it completely right. There's a level of humbling to this that we have to bring to the table. Having said that, there are two things that I think help ensure that we don't have impacts that get us to a situation like we are in right now. And one of them is like, fail fast, fail forward is a big idea in entrepreneurship, in technology, startups, and the lean methodology. And I almost feel that we need to not fail fast, fail forward, but we need to create safe fails, where it is safe to fail. So whatever you're creating, whatever experiment you're putting out there is safe if it fails. The negative impact will not have that drastic an effect. And so to me, there's a shift in that mindset there, which is kind of key. And the second thing is the strength of our feedback loops with our systems determines the impact we're having. And so the stronger our feedback loops are tended to, nourished, taken care of, the more we have the data and the information that, we're on the right track. And so I think feedback loops play a very important role. And that touches to Anna's point around contextual data and qualitative data. So these two, safe to fail and feedback loops, I think might be two ways with a huge dollop of humbleness that we won't get it right.
And then the only addition I'll add is I think there's a cult of the entrepreneur right now as well, which I have certainly been a part of and victim to. Like, I'm going to start this food company. I'm going to help feed malnourished children, and I'm going to offset carbon, and I'm going to save the world. And so I think there's an opportunity here to be a bit more humble about what our impact can be, and then also be willing to kill this a baby that that entrepreneur has put into the world. And that might be one of the hardest things to do for entrepreneurs. Say, you know what, my beautiful grand idea isn't working, or wasn't working like I thought it was. And so I think we're also trying to build in ways for entrepreneurs and ambitious organizations to say, let's be a little bit less heroic and be more inquisitive, be more curious, and allow ourselves that safe space to fail, but also realize we don't need to solve every single challenge right now. We have to do this right. We have to do it well, and we need to give ourselves some space to do that.
And I don't think it's always failing. Like in some ways that sets it up as sort of either or. It's like, okay, maybe it just doesn't work as well as we thought it was going to. And then we have the opportunity to figure out why, as opposed to, I suck, I failed. Start down a whole other path that's not kind of being self-reflective and having those kind of dialogues that you're talking about with both the people that we're supposedly serving or working with, or to get their inputs. You know, like, there's opportunities for change. Like, continuous improvement is a good thing.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Staggered, humble awesomeness. That's the word that came to me as we were talking. Staggered, humbled awesomeness. Okay.
Well, we are coming up on 3.
Okay.
Any final thoughts you want to leave with people as we're starting to wrap down?
I wonder if we speak to the, do you think we should talk about the canvas? Adrian, what are you feeling?
Yeah, let's introduce that. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll do this and wind this down, and really grateful for everybody for being here and questioning. But so where we've taken these mindset shifts to is, and if anybody wants to email us and get a copy of this to play with in the future, we're happy to, since we didn't get to the pen on paper session. But what we're doing is building tools for ambitious organizations and entrepreneurs who want to solve real problems. You know, the problems that they feel are really important to them and or their communities or the world. And so we've created what's called the Regenerative Business Model Canvas, and it's a current iteration of what we've been working with and what we've kind of born from practice over the last 10 to 15 years. But creating it in a tool in a way that tries to capture the different mindset shifts and the explorations. And just to give you an example, what we typically do is, I'm going to go to the left hand of this canvas is what we call network and systems mapping. And so when we talked about earlier, the silo to the systems lens, there's an exercise we do here where we take people and we zoom them out and we have them map the system that they exist in either as an entrepreneur or an organization. And we start to uncover these different nodes that we might not really realize are there. Again, back to the Brazil child health example, the house, the family, the income, the education, where the child is going. And so we start to look at this in a more nuanced and subtle way. And then I'm going back to the canvas for a second. There's a place we call existing relationships. We start to look at the relationships between the center of this network, which is you, the entrepreneur, and the different nodes. And we start to identify what are these relationships like? Are they degenerative? Am I just trying to get something out of this person who's my customer and transacting with them in a sustainable way? Or am I trying to actually regenerate them and help them move up the hierarchy of needs? And we do this through a system of needs assessment. And so one example I can give here is I was running this canvas with someone who has a software platform that helps teachers produce math problems really quickly. The entrepreneur's goal, his joie de vivre, why he's in business, is he wants to bring more joy into the classroom for the teacher so that the kids get a better experience and they can actually become the people they want to be as students. But what we realized is that he was just offering teachers a transactional relationship. Here's this software, you use it, you get this thing. But through doing the canvas, we identified the relationship with the teachers and we said, well, how can we actually address the esteem and the self-actualization of these teachers? We know you're helping them do their job a little bit faster, a little bit better now, but what if we actually invited them into the process of creating math problems and creating the software? And every summer you have a ChalkDoc camp. That's the name of his company, ChalkDoc Camp. The teachers come for 2 hours every day virtually and help you build the next iteration of your software. And they get to put in their ideas and what they're seeing in the classroom and bring their whole vast experience and participate in this with you. And so that was an aha, a way we used the canvas to find a place where we could regenerate a relationship in their business model that will carve out, we believe, a whole nother level of value, not for the organization, not only for the organization, but also for the people that organization is trying to serve. And then I'll touch on just one other thing. We talked earlier about shifting from profit to regenerative value. And the canvas really works by starting from the outsides and kind of working itself in the middle. And hopefully if you've done it right, you get this beautiful little nugget of what we call the regenerative value proposition. And so if you're familiar with traditional business models, they have something called the unique value proposition. But we think that the next leaders, the next organizations that lead us into a better future are going to start to identify their regenerative value proposition by going through this deep inquiry and understanding how they can impact the world and impact their networks in a really regenerative way. So that's what we've been working on for some time now, and what we're really excited to continue inviting into the world. And one thing I'd love to invite from anyone listening, and Sue as well, is that if you have any ideas, suggestions, places to continue sharing this, tweaks to this, things that we should look at, we are open to that. We are evolving this as we go and as we share it with the world. So we're actually co-creating with you all, and your questions, your ideas are extremely important and a gift to us. So we welcome those.
Absolutely. We're in our own journey of staggered, humble awesomeness. I have one thing I want to say about the canvas before I kind of let us close, and that's if you can go back to an image of the canvas, and this is important and pertinent, especially where we are, is if you look at there's a block down here, it's not highlighted, it's based on equity. And so whenever we talk about hierarchy of needs and systems and relationships, I think grounding that in equity is a very important part, because the needs of each of these different nodes that we're trying to identify as a business owner are going to look very different. And having that lens of equity is really, really important. And I wanted to name that is a core driver of human equity. We need to meet that as much as, and all the different levels as we are seeing playing out in our world today as well. So I just wanted to make sure I talk about that. And I want to echo everything Adrian said, that we would love this to be a continued conversation. We've set up a system to actually walk somebody through this canvas for their business. So if anybody's interested, we have 2 more slots for the month of August. So if you're interested, I'm going to put the link and sign up, and we will work with you to find that regenerative value proposition that you want to bring into this world.
Well, I really appreciate both of you, Mansi and Adrian, exposing us to a different way of thinking about sort of the role of business and what business is able to show up and do on the planet at this time and moving forward. I know one of the messages that we've heard from a lot of the purpose-driven businesses last week, and, you know, we're just starting this week, is, you know, sometimes like going through traditional business training and traditional mapping out of what's this business going to be, when somebody's trying to do something bigger and weave that in, sometimes that other way of thinking doesn't actually help them get to where they need to get to. So like, I think you all are onto something, and I look forward to seeing what else you do with this, because I think it helps open up people's thinking and think about connections in a different way. So you're the cutting edge. So we all will be waiting to see what's next. And like, it's great food for thought. Like I'm like going, okay, in my world, what does regenerative look like? So, you know, that's valuable, like asking some new questions. So thanks a lot for being willing to share this with us.
Absolutely. And we would love to do that, the pen on paper, with anybody who would like to do that, because we believe this should be grounded in real examples in real life. And so we invite anybody to do that. And Sue, thank you so much for making this happen and all the work that you're doing in the world. We believe that the problems that we're facing are so great and grand and wonderful that it's going to take all of us working together, learning from each other, supporting each other to do that. And so you've convened a space where you've allowed us to do that and learn from each other. And that's what a great gift.
Thanks.
May we all be strong trees in a strong forest.
Oh, well, thank you to both of you, and thank you to folks that showed up live. I'm sure we're also going to be having quite a few people listening afterwards. And the information about how to get in touch with both Mansi and Adrian is on your speaker sheets, but I'll make sure that that's in near where the video is going to be. So please reach out. I think you can hear they're very open to a dialogue, and they want to, like, in some ways test their processes and continue to do continuous improvement, even though that's not what you're calling it. That's
Staggered, humble awesomeness.
Oh, humbled awesomeness. There you go. Well, buddy, see you at the next session. And thank you both again.
Thanks, Terry and Edwin and Anna and Tamara. And thank you, Sue.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.